Our speaker today is Paul Golin, Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. That's the organization bringing together a humanistic philosophy of life with Judaism understood as a cultural and historical tradition, no supernatural subscription required. Paul also leads Jews for a Secular Democracy, pluralistic social justice initiative working to defend the separation of religion and government by mobilizing Jewish voices who take democracy seriously. He's a writer, speaker, advocate, and consultant on topics like secularity, intermarriage, disaffiliation, and inclusion. Basically, the questions communities wrestle with when they're honest about who they actually are. He's co-authored 2 books, and his writing has appeared in The Forward, Jewish Week, Huffington Post, and beyond. But on a more personal note, Paul is a white Ashkenazi dad in a probably Japanese household, Jewish and Japanese, and he even runs the Japanese Facebook group, which is exactly as delightful and educational as it sounds. Please join me in welcoming Paul Golin to the CFSC.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for braving this brutal Orlando winter to be here. I flew down from New York yesterday where it was snowing, so clearly this is my fault. I apologize if you believe that Jews control the weather, which I think at least one of our congresswomen does. Well, my talk is titled, Why Are There So Many Atheist Jews? Ultimately, what I'm really interested in discussing in a larger sense is identity and how we derive meaning from our identities. For so many of us, being atheist, agnostic, freethinker, secular, humanistic, however you want to label yourself, is central to who we are. And this identity can provide us with meaning and purpose and connection to others. And I will say I've been working in the secular organizing space for almost a decade now. What you've got in Central Florida with this group is almost unique in the country. I can think of maybe 2 other locations that has a community as organized as this one. And since I'm here, I'll say this one's the best. No, but really, this is unique and special and remarkable, and I hope a model for other communities around the country. But it's not simply a binary yes or no answer to the question, do we believe in God, that provides this value. It is also what the values are that we derive from it, like inclusion and equality. And we all have many more identities than that. As you heard, I'm a dad. Being a dad is a very important part of my identity. It wasn't always a part of my identity. I had to become a dad first. So these things move and change and can change on life situation or belief systems. Being Jewish, culturally, ethnically, is central to my identity. And I'm happy to get to explain why I choose to center that specific identity in my work. But I also hope to universalize it so you can see how it might work for lots of other potential identities that can provide meaning and purpose. I think about meaningful identity a lot because I feel that if we're going to grow this movement, we have to provide a big vision for a positive future. Freethinkers have been playing defense since basically we've been allowed to be open about our beliefs. And even today, we're forced back on our heels by every next egregious attempt by religious fundamentalists to hijack reproductive rights or LGBTQ equality or try to institute prayer in public schools or terrorize immigrant communities or whatever the daily outrage is. I'm still holding out hope that we will get past this and see the Star Trek vision of humankind, rejecting religious superstition and ancient hatreds to meet our full potential. For me, as in Star Trek, doing so doesn't mean humanity has to homogenize differences in cultural expressions or interests or identities in order to live in harmony. When the original Star Trek series came out in the 1960s, it was pretty radical to have a crew that was made up. First of all, you may know the first interracial kiss on television, but you also had different nationalities all on the same crew, including a Rusky, right? But the only mixed person on that crew was Spock, who was mixed human and Vulcan. Today, I think, and with more recent Star Trek shows, series, the diversity has continued to increase. I love those folks online who are like, when did Star Trek become so woke? You know, from day one. Using secular Jewish identity as a way into this conversation, I'm going to make 5 key points and go just a little deeper on each, and then I'd like to be guided by your questions. So these are the points I'm going to flesh out. First, American Jews are remarkably secular. Second, secular Judaism is an option because Judaism is not just a religion. Third, Humanistic Judaism, which is what I work on every day, is one approach that merges atheist philosophy with an ethno-religious heritage. Fourth, there are benefits to engaging in community and even in ritual practice when they are repurposed for our modern sensibilities. And fifth, we can make secular meaning from any source. So first, American Jews are remarkably secular. Jews are the second largest religion in America after Christianity, if you can consider Christianity one religion, which for argument's sake, let's do that. If you know this answer already, let others who aren't sure guess. What percentage of Americans are Jewish? Any guesses? 4%, 1%, 10%, okay, 2%, 3%. Most of you are getting it. It's about 2.5%. I've heard varying like 30%, as high as that. It's very small, 2.5%. And obviously, we do have outsized influence, you know, because we control the banks in Hollywood and space lasers, right? I can make that joke. If you're not Jewish, please refrain from making that joke. But we are a highly achieving minority, a model minority in a lot of ways, and at the same time as having great privilege, about 80 to 90% of American Jews are of Ashkenazic descent, which I can talk about, but basically it is white or white presenting. And that provides us with a lot of privilege, and at the same time, we can be endangered. As I'm sure you all know, the rise of anti-Semitism over the last decade is real. People have been killed in America simply for being Jewish. So there's this weird duality between having a lot of privilege and also being afraid at times. So every decade or so, there is a big study of American Jews. Because we're only 2.5%, when we are included in general surveys of Americans, it's never really a big enough sample size to fully trust the numbers. But every decade or so, there will be a large population study just of Jews. The last 2 have been done by the Pew Foundation, who is a very reputable research organization. And the last time they did it, which was 2020, they asked a couple of questions that I really loved. They asked, do you believe in God? And for those who said both yes and no, they followed up the question, which I thought was really important. So the percentage of Jews, the follow-up questions were, do you believe in the God of the Bible? Or do you believe in some other higher power or spiritual force? Or neither? And the result that they found was 26% of US Jews believe in the God of the Bible. And that's very low. They compared that to 56% of all Americans who say, yes, they believe in the God of the Bible, right? So that is a dramatic difference. And on the other end of that spectrum, the Jews who said no to either the God of the Bible or any other spiritual force was 22%. So 22% of US Jews are just flat out atheist agnostic, and that compares to about 10% of all Americans. So more than double on both ends of the spectrum. I'm really interested in this middle 50%, which they did not ask the follow-up question to, which believes in some higher power or spiritual force. Because my follow-up question would be, does that higher power or spiritual force interject into human affairs? And just knowing the Jews that I know, my guess is that at least half of that, 50%, would say no, that God is in all of us. You know, it's the Spinoza God of nature. It's the Force from Star Wars. You can tell I'm a geek. You know, it infuses all of us, that kind of God. But as far as punishing you for driving on the Sabbath, you know, no. And so if you combine the 22% who are just flat out atheist agnostic, and probably another 25 or more percent who had answered yes something, you've got half, I would estimate, or even more, of American Jews who simply don't believe God is paying attention, if there is one. And that's pretty powerful. And why? You know, what drove Jewish secularity? Since the Enlightenment, and there was a parallel experience for the Jews of Europe called Haskalah, which loosely translate to enlightenment, once the option was given to leave religion, Jews who were able took it up. And so Jewish secularity has existed for at least a couple of hundred years. And I am at least third generation atheist Jew, and I don't know that there's one specific thing that we can attribute it to, but I think there are a variety of factors. Jews like to claim that the Jewish religion encourages the asking of questions. In my experience, yes and no. You can question a lot, and then there's certain things that they really don't want you to question. But I think compared to a lot of other religions where knowledge is dictated from on high and there is no questioning at all, I think Judaism is really unique. If you know a bit about the texts, the foundational texts of Judaism, it's, you know, the Bible that most Americans are familiar with, or the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. But there is an entire compendium of dialogue that follows it called the Talmud, in which the losing arguments or debates of rabbis are recorded in case one day they will be the correct answers. And you've got a lot of interesting things, and secular Jews still will study the Talmud just to see what the ethical debates were. And you've got some really interesting things in there, including, you know, a debate about what happens after you die, and there's all kinds of like fanciful ideas included. And then one rabbi just says, you become meal for the worms. I'm like, I like that guy, and I appreciate that it was included in the Talmud, and it raises questions when you're studying this. I think it was a terrible branding decision that we don't have an actual afterlife that we could just tell people about. It didn't help us spread the word, like when people are like, what happens after you die? And we're like, we don't know. But I think it's a little bit more honest. And it doesn't, there's tons of Jewish guilt, but that aspect of it isn't built into the afterlife. So this idea that it's up to us has been there in Judaism for quite some time, and some of the things that emerged out of it, beyond the fact that Jews were able to secularize and impact the world in ways that were far disproportionate to their numbers, including like someone like Sigmund Freud or an Albert Einstein, or even like Harry Houdini was a secular Jew. And, you know, if you don't know what else he did, I presume you all know who Harry Houdini was as far as the escape artist magician goes, but he also spent a significant part of his career debunking these mediums who were very popular in his time, who would take your money and then tell you what your dead relatives were thinking. And one of the stories I love about him is he and his wife had a word where if whoever died first they would know that word, so they can go and debunk mediums who would claim that they're speaking on behalf of the other one, and his wife actually did do that and never revealed what the word was. So he's a hero of mine. You may have heard of the ethical culture movement that was founded by a rabbi's son named Felix Adler. He was the rabbi his father was the rabbi at a Reform temple that I actually got married in, which is Temple Emmanuel on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. If you're ever in town, walk in. It's beautiful. It's the Jewish St. Patrick's Cathedral. My wife wanted to get married in a castle because she's a princess, and I wanted to get married by a rabbi, and we found that was the perfect spot. But anyway, he was supposed to inherit the job, a little bit of nepotism, and one of the first sermons he gave was about why he doesn't believe in God, and the elders at the community felt like maybe this wasn't the right hire. But ethical culture as a movement was pretty significant in the 20th century. There's still a magnificent building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan that they operate out of, and basically what he did was bring values from multiple sources and kind of strip away completely the ethnic component of Judaism. So when we move into and there were lots of other secular expressions of Judaism. So my personal story, my mom was born in a displaced persons camp in Berlin after World War II. Her parents survived the Holocaust in hiding, lost pretty much all of both sides of their family. On my family tree is 14 relatives who all were murdered on the same day from ages 80 to 8 months old. They were marched to the edge of their village, made to dig a ditch, and just shot. And so there's mass murder in my family history. My grandparents survived. And you would think that their atheism, I never saw my grandmother do anything religious, but being Jewish was very, very important to her. And she never expressed any belief in God, but I don't know that God died for her in the Holocaust, because when I see photos of her siblings, all of whom were killed, but in the 1930s, they were in Białystok, Poland, and there's this photo burned into my mind because it was in her bedroom of her and her siblings in the 30s at a meeting. They're all wearing black turtlenecks and they were mods in the 30s. They were part of the Yiddish Bund, which was a labor movement. They were socialists and activists. They were not religious at all. She had painted those kind of painted style photos of her parents, and her dad had the big beard and looked religiously Jewish. But I don't think God was a factor even before the Holocaust, and certainly not after the Holocaust. And I think that happened to a lot of Jews as well. And I will say that I didn't really discuss this until I was preparing for my bar mitzvah in a conservative synagogue. And I don't know how many of you have experienced this yourself, but there is so much Hebrew, and they don't teach you Hebrew. You're supposed to, for me, it was memorizing a bad song in a language I don't understand. And I resented it, and I knew by age 11 that I didn't believe it, but there was no conversation. And it was presumed, I thought, that everyone here believes this, because why else are we gathering, and in the conservative movement, it was 3.5 hours on Saturdays, to pray to something that turns out a lot of the people in that room don't actually believe, and that's not why they were doing it. But nobody was saying this. And I got to a point where I thought I was going to drop this bombshell on my mom when I said at age 12, I'm not having a bar mitzvah because I don't believe in God. And she said, well, I don't either, and you're having a bar mitzvah. So I had a bar mitzvah. But it was really informative for me because her whole career ran Jewish community centers. I drove by one in this neighborhood, not far from here, and the one she ran was on Long Island, very high-powered board, Wall Street people. She did this her whole career, and even at that time, I had to ask myself, why is she dedicating herself to the Jewish people career-wise if she doesn't believe in God? But I knew the answer already, because Judaism as a culture and identity and food infused everything that we were. So that was the only theological conversation I ever had with my mom, really, but it was helpful to kind of see the world a little bit differently, but I knew that I was not going to do that same thing to my kid that was done to me, as far as, and in my parents' defense, they didn't know there was an option, and I didn't know there was an option, but there was an option because out in suburban Detroit, a rabbi named Sherwin Wine in the mid-1960s said, I love being Jewish. He was ordained in the Reform movement. He liked Jewish holidays. He liked celebrating life cycle events. But he wanted to be honest about what he does and doesn't believe. And the words of the liturgy, of the Jewish liturgy for holidays and life cycle events, didn't feel honest to him. And he had known of humanism, which, if you don't know what humanism is, I won't do a deep dive, but that has also been around either thousands of years or 150, depending on how you want to measure things. But this, on one foot, I will say it is that there will be no divine intervention, so it's up to people to make the world a better place, and we have the capacity to do that by using the best of human intellect and reason and empathy and human power. And he was a humanist. So what he did, the one innovation he did in the mid-60s, was he rewrote the liturgy, the Jewish holiday celebrations and life cycle events, to remove God or the supernatural and replace it with a humanist philosophy. I wish I had known about that when I was a kid. I wish there were conversations going on about it. There weren't. But when I heard about humanistic Judaism, I didn't take on the identity immediately, but I was glad to know there was a word to describe what I had just come to organically. And so my mission professionally is to find that angry 12-year-old and let them know that there's an option, and you don't have to walk away completely from this identity that may provide meaning in other ways because you don't believe it and you think the only way to be part of this is through belief. So that is where secularity informs what I do, and as I said, Judaism has never been just a religion. And this is both an opportunity and a real challenge, right? It started in an area of the world and at a time in the world of tribes and tribalism. And even today, people will say, oh, are you a member of the tribe? And they think it's very cute. But it's also potentially very alienating for folks who may have converted into Judaism or want to get past ethnocentrism. So I am both, I feel connected to being an Ashkenazic Jew through the history of my people, and also I'm not sure I get to make any claim that, hey, Einstein was Jewish too. Like, I didn't do it, So why should I take any kind of credit that I'm ethnically somehow attached to him? So and as you heard, my wife is from Japan. My kids are half Ashkenazic Jewish and half Japanese by ethnicity. And whatever the pride might be in my ethnicity is not going to carry on to the next generation. And I'll tell you that my Holocaust surviving grandmother used to tell me regularly, if you marry somebody who's not Jewish, you finish Hitler's job. And that was pretty powerful coming from a Holocaust survivor. But that said, I also knew from a very young age that that wasn't my values. And it conflicted with the values I was hearing from my parents, who said the same thing, but they also said, judge everybody as an individual. Don't judge anybody by the color of their skin or their background, except when it comes to marriage. And then just judge them. So I knew I didn't agree with her. I didn't argue with her, but I didn't agree. And I would honestly argue that my Japanese kids would be more upsetting to Hitler than just if he knew where all the Jews were. Right now we're dispersed a little bit. But the question of meaning is still there. And so they're not going to derive their meaning through ethnic identity alone. And in fact, I love Japanese culture. I'll never be Japanese, but they could end up moving to Japan, having kids with Japanese people, and maybe the Jewish part of their lineage would just be a blip in what was actually a Japanese story. And for people even today in the Jewish community, they may feel that's tragic, and I just don't, because the things I want for my kids are health and fulfillment and to be good people, and being Jewish is pretty far down that list. And if they're finding those other things on their journey, then that's not my concern. And even if they do end up doing that, or like I use, like if they marry somebody who's half Italian, half Guatemalan, then their kids will get to choose from 4 traditions. And the beautiful thing about culture is the only limit is interest and time in the day. They can decide to do whatever has meaning for them. The old model of obligation has faded, even for believing Jews. So beyond just the ethnic component, and Judaism is a global religion with multiple ethnicities. This is why our founding Rabbi Sherwin Wine talked about Judaism as a culture and not an ethnicity so much. So the Ashkenazic culture is deep and has impacted the world. How many of you had tried this unique ethnic food called a bagel? Have you tried that? So in that way, everyone is a little bit Jewish. Everyone is engaging in Jewish culture. But again, there's parts of the Jewish community that would say reading the New York Times and eating a bagel with lox on Sunday mornings should not be your whole Jewish identity. And I'm like, I'm fine with that. If that's what provides meaning for you, then that's fine. So I don't want the kind of judgmentalism to drive anybody's identity. There's also aspects of Ashkenazic Judaism has its own language, right? Yiddish. Some of you may speak it more than others. I bet you guys all use some of it sometimes. Has anyone said schmuck? How about putz? Do we know putz? Is putz too advanced, or do we know the literal translation of putz? So Humanistic Judaism is a way for people to say what they mean and mean what they say when they are doing Jewish ritual. Ritual can still provide value and meaning to people. I think all of us do some kind of ritual. Even the most secular of us may stay up till midnight on New Year's Eve, may want to do some kind of celebration when they get married. I once spoke to somebody who worked at Center for Inquiry, and which is an interesting organization you may know. And his whole thing was, I don't do any ritual at all. And I said, when you got married, didn't you have a wedding? He's like, no, we went down to City Hall, we signed a piece of paper. I said, on New Year's Eve, don't you stay up till midnight? He's like, no, we're always in bed at 9:30. I'm like, that's your ritual right there. Like it's hard not to have some kind of meaningful rituals, but I actually seek it out, and it, even for some things that may be mundane, like we all have to eat, but to have meals where you build some kind of rituals around it can provide an added meaning for it. So in Humanistic Judaism, we're not thanking God for this wine that we're about to drink, but we are thankful for it, and we perhaps are the blessing thanks those who brought forth wine from the earth. Someone made that wine, and we can have a moment before we drink it to be thankful for them. So that's how we try to infuse ritual into what we do, and try to make secular meaning from, it could really happen from any source. And thankfulness, mindfulness, these are things that even secular people are seeking out, because we understand that in this world where it's just nonstop scrolling and information, that to take a moment to step back is beneficial. And there's science behind it, if you are really science-minded, to demonstrate that it works. And it is can be done for everyone. So I'll give you an example. Because I get to choose from two different cultures. Of course, I can also do something American, but there is blessings before and after you eat in Judaism, which I never did, was never going to do. But I know what they are. I've done them in communal settings and conferences when I worked solely in the Jewish community. And the blessing after the meal is called Birkat Hamazon, and it's set to a song. And when you're in a Jewish conference, you know all the kids who went to Jewish camp because they clap at a certain time. So, I know those blessings. I'm not going to do them at home, but there's a Japanese ritual before you eat where you put your hands together and you say itadakimasu. I don't know that you have to put your hands together, but it, I think my understanding is you're kind of thanking the dead food that you're about to eat. But it's a moment, right? It's a moment of mindfulness, and you can do it in one word, and that we do. And so there's a competition between rituals and culture, and the Jewish ritual is really long and time-consuming, and this Japanese ritual is one word, and we get it done, and then we eat. And I like that. And it does tie me and my family to their culture. But I'm not Japanese, in case you couldn't tell. And I still derive meaning from it. And that piece of it, I think, there's some care that needs to be taken around cultural appropriation. But I think that there are many other traditions that could be of value to people, and that as secular people, we can actually think about using some of these to find meaning. I know that one of the groups that we are in collaboration with is called Black Nonbelievers, and they have a gospel singing group, and what they sing in gospel is not prayer to God, but it uses gospel as you would recognize it, and it's really powerful, and it ties them to the African American experience. And I think that's just another great example of how we can use ritual to tie us to something that is bigger than ourselves, right? What is spirituality? Is feeling like you're tied to something bigger than yourself. And I feel like I am tied to Jewish history when I engage in Jewish practice, and it is a way of honoring my ancestors, my grandparents. I don't think that they're watching from above, so I'm not doing it out of guilt, but I'm doing it because it has meaning to me, and because it brings me positive memories, and because I do want my kids to know what the journey has been for their ancestors, because I think it will help them be better people in the world. And I will just kind of leave it on that note, which is that as a straight white man in America, I can blend and just simply let my Jewish identity go. And I don't want to, because even though I have that option, which many people do not, being tied to a minority experience allows me to have, I hope, a level of empathy for all minorities and all people who may or may not be suffering discrimination, to keep me in a mindset that would be supportive of them. And I think that's why Jews overwhelmingly vote liberal, because we carry with us the experiences of persecution, and we recognize it when we see it. I am happy to open it up to your thoughts, questions, go wherever you want to go with this. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I was not expecting comedy along with some, but being Jewish, I can understand it. I'm just curious, I'm probably what people would consider a bad Jew. I don't practice, though I was brought up Jewish, but I was never bat mitzvahed. I went to Jewish sleepaway camps, which is probably where I got a lot of my rituals from, and I don't practice any to this day. But I'm curious, the only one that I still keep is I light the candles.
Right.
On Hanukkah. Does your family
on
do
Hanukkah?
that?
Yeah, sure. And I want to address a couple of things you said, but just with the candle lighting, whether it's Shabbat, which we don't do, or Hanukkah, which we absolutely do, my kids are 10 and 13. They are showing no signs of letting up about getting a present every night of all 8 nights. But I love it. And to their credit, they're like, let's light the menorah. Like, it's not just to get to the gifts, they like the ritual too, but it doesn't hurt that it's followed immediately thereafter by a gift. But the blessing that humanistic Jews use is, blessed is the light, right? You're lighting a candle. Blessed is the light in the world, blessed is the light in people, blessed is the light in Hanukkah. So it's not about God. Some people use a different word than blessed. If they feel like that word doesn't work, they use radiant is the light. But just doing the ritual forces us together as a family, which we almost never do. It's hard enough to get them to put their phones down during dinner, right? Forces us together to do this ritual, and I love it, and they love it, and I know they love it because they stop whining for 3 minutes. So it's something that we really value. But I do want to point out that you apologetically said, I'm a bad Jew. And that phrase, if you don't know, is like the worst propaganda that Jews use against other Jews. It's just, and I've called myself that. It is, by whose standards, right? Are you a good person? If you're a good person, then you're a good Jew, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
I want to thank you for coming out. This was very interesting. I know I'm probably in the minority age range here, but it's nice to hear from somebody who's navigating the parenting world. My grandmother is Sephardic, so that was really cool to hear the statistics. But we raised our children. My husband's Puerto Rican, so I guess we're Jewricans. That would be the term. But I've got like a 1.5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old, and I feel like there's a lot in trying to navigate the holidays, especially here in Florida. And I don't know, I like hearing your insights and to hear if you have any other insights, because we do Hanukkah, we do Rosh Hashanah, we do Passover, we try to do something for Tu B'Shvat. So like I try to incorporate things, but then I also do some pagan things as well.
Sure.
And so I don't know, just if you have any other insights, because it is a lot to navigate, and I feel like there's so much pressure from the majority religion that's present in trying to parent, I guess.
Sure. And there was a point where it felt like our nation was becoming more multicultural. I'm older than you, but many of you will remember growing up and maybe going to the mall and seeing Santa Claus, whose lap you can sit on, which is always a little creepy to me, but okay. And a giant Christmas tree, and nothing for Hanukkah. Even I grew up in New York, in Staten Island, New York, where there were plenty of Jews, but it was all Christmas, all December, and then one year, a little tiny menorah next to the giant Christmas tree. I'm like, all right, and now there's actually a full-blown Hanukkah display with a giant menorah, gold coins, again, a very problematic thing. But okay, we did that one to ourselves. But it felt like there was a recognition that there is a diversity here and people can celebrate what they want to celebrate, and it's not necessarily in competition. I feel like we're losing some of that to the power of Christian nationalism today, but I thought of that because, again, do what you find meaningful or what your family may find meaningful. If it's too much, if it doesn't feel like it's bringing meaning, to me, that's the measure. And if there's outsiders judging, like you're supposed to do it this way or you're supposed to do this or this, that piece, I understand why it's so powerful, especially if it's coming from family members. But ultimately, it's you, it's your kids. Do what you think is going to be meaningful, and if it's not going to be meaningful, I don't see the rationale for doing it unless you can like the things I measure by is, does this make my life better? Or does this make my family's life better? Or does it help improve the world? Right? It's like the balance between being selfish and altruistic, which is, there's a classic Jewish expression from, I want to say, the Talmud of, if I am not for myself, Hillel, right? That's in the Talmud, right? Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. Yeah, see, I remember some of it. So the phrase is, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am not for others, what am I? And if not now, when? Right? So it's the balance of, you have to look out for yourself, obviously, but how are you helping to make the world a better place? And so none of that, to me, is about, you should do this because your ancestors did it. And I can understand when someone feels like, oh, that was a tradition that lasted 2,000 years and now it's gone. I get it. But there won't be any of that kind of nostalgia in the next generation. So it's just kind of, things change. And so to me, the more important thing is the meaning and the ethics and values behind it that might make the world a better place. I hope that kind of gets at what you're asking.
Thanks. Paul, thanks so much for coming today. Really appreciate it. A couple of things I would just like to mention. CFFC has started a Jewish social group. We're calling ourselves Humanists, and so if you're interested in joining us, if you get the monthly emails or meetup listings, you'll see that. One thing I wanted to ask is, I feel, this is almost feeding into what you were just talking about the last 15, 20 years. It seemed like there was a time in American culture where Jews were perceived as sort of influential in American society. I think back to like the mid-20th century, a lot of television personalities and, just sort of popular culture was much more Jewish friendly, shall we say. Henny Youngman, just to pull a name out of the air. And it doesn't seem like Jews in America now have the same influence that we did back then. And I'm 59, and so sort of in my lifetime I've seen that. Do you have a sense of why that would be?
I don't think that's accurate. I think Jews are still very overrepresented in the creative arts, and I think we're in a better place than we were in the 50s. Henny Youngman's comedy was not about being Jewish. Sarah Silverman's is. If you follow her, she talks about it every day. She talks about her sister who's a rabbi. It is different, but I think it is just as powerful. Jon Stewart, who people are like floating to run for president, talks about it from his Jewish perspectives all the time. And so, there are things that happened that are just so different, it's really hard to compare. There were 3 TV stations for when I was a kid, right? So anyone who was on that had a far wider reach than what happens today. But I see Jews, and openly atheist cultural Jews as well, who remain Jewishly identified in all kinds of spheres of influence in American society. So that part I'm never worried about. And again, that was like the claim 30, 40 years ago when intermarriage really started to take off between people who are Jewish and not Jewish, that we're going to lose this or that, or like what the losses are. But the reality is there are also tremendous benefits that the organized Jewish community, for the most part, never wants to talk about, but that I want to talk about because they're real. And I think that we're just moving into a different place. I don't think Jews are at risk from disappearing as long as we find meaning in it. And if there's no meaning in it, then, like right now, nobody on the planet very seriously believes in the Greek and Roman pantheon of gods. And there's nobody here who's upset that there aren't any Zeus worshippers left, right? So it's like things change. I'm just not that worried that Jews or Judaism is going to disappear anytime soon, and I'm much more interested in what can we make out of this that is useful for our own times versus trying to preserve this thing that may or may not have worked in the past. Thank you.
Any other questions? While I'm walking over, I have a question. Can you talk to us about Jews for a secular democracy?
Yes. So first of all, if you want to learn more about Humanistic Judaism, our website is SHJ, Society for Humanistic Judaism.org, SHJ. We have a free email that only comes once a week, so we won't inundate you, but we do a lot of free online programming, and obviously we're a nonprofit, so if you want to become a member, that would help support us, but we do a lot of our stuff online for free. And when I came on, I asked, what kind of social justice are we doing? Because that's how many secular Jews express their Jewish values, is not through synagogue participation, but through activism. And what are we doing? And I didn't get great answers. So I said, okay, what do we agree about? And spoiler alert, it wasn't Israel, but it was separation of church and state here in the United States and all of the issues that flow from it, because we are both a religious minority still as Jews and also a religious minority or a minority as non-religious people. And so we launched an initiative in 2019 called Jews for a Secular Democracy. When we launched it, I did a search. Do you know the Forward is the large national Jewish newspaper? I searched their website for the phrase Christian nationalism and got 6 answers, like 6 hits, 6 pages, 6 articles that mention Christian nationalism. If you search that today, it'll be hundreds. But just 5 years ago, there was a real fear in the Jewish community of naming Christian nationalism because I think we're afraid that people would think we're bashing all of Christianity, which is not Christian nationalism. So we launched this pluralistic initiative because we wanted all Jews from all denominations to be involved. You don't have to be secular to join our voices together and advocate for separation of church and state. The separation of church and state in America is what has allowed Jews to thrive here like no other diaspora nation in 2,000 years history. So we should be defending that, and we saw that many of the organizations in the Jewish community that had been on the front line of church-state separation in the 1950s were now very preoccupied with defending Israel's right to do whatever the hell they want to do and not focus so much on, because I think also there was a sense that we had won, that abortion was legal and we had equal rights and so on and so forth. I don't think anyone was ready for this reactionary wave that we're currently experiencing. So that has a separate website, JFASD, Jews for Secular Democracy. We do have brochures if you want to get involved. We'd love your participation. We do things like this coming Thursday, we're going to get on a webinar together, talk about how to call your congressman or senator, and then we're going to pause the webinar and everyone go make their calls and then come back and say how it went about funding for ICE, which is on the docket for the next couple of weeks in Congress, and we want to hold ICE accountable to the laws of the land, and that's supposed to be the job of Congress. And we want to call our folks, our representatives, and let them know that this is important to us. So if you take our brochure, we'll let you know about that. And it's like literally like 40 minutes in the middle of the day. Make a couple of calls. If you've never called who here has actually called or met with your elected official? So it's a good group of activists, but if you haven't yet, it's not hard to do, and they want to hear from you. They want to know what their constituents are thinking. So we're trying to organize that. Yes. They actually keep track of what their constituents do and don't believe. Was there one more question? Yeah.
Yeah, hello, thanks for coming.
Of course.
You mentioned that you're a white-passing person. Mm-hmm. Do you receive more pushback when you reveal your Jewish identity or when you reveal an atheist identity?
It's a great question. So there was The way that the Pew survey, I've done a really deep dive on that last Pew survey that I mentioned, and when they do the next one, I will as well. It's really fascinating because they start off, to find the Jews to talk to, they start off by asking, what is your religion? And among the choices, and in that one, I think they actually do break down Catholic and I don't think they group all of Christianity, but maybe. But one of the check boxes is Jewish, and one of the check boxes is atheists, and one of the check boxes is nothing in particular. And I wrote a piece shortly after that came out saying, I'm really torn. If I had gotten that survey, which one to check? Because on the one hand, my automatic reaction is Jewish, but on the other, I recognize that actually atheists are more disenfranchised in America in a lot of ways. And I'll give you an example. There are way more identifiably Jewish members of Congress than there are atheists. There's only one out of 535 members of Congress who is openly atheist, which is way less representation than the general population. I think we have overrepresentation, but not by much, of Jewish representatives. So I would be torn, but I think I would check Jewish in the hopes that they then ask about belief. But what happened when they asked it that way, it was a way for them to capture Jews who said nothing in particular, or atheist or agnostic as their religion, because the very next question for them was, do you consider yourself Jewish in any other way? Ancestry, culture, heritage. And that percentage, who then said yes, has been on the rise for decades. And that's what Pew has been tracking, not just with Jews, but with all Americans, the rise of the nuns. Have you heard this? N-O-N-E-S, not the Catholic clergy, but the rise of the nuns. So their corollary in the Jewish studies is Jews of no religion. And so I am a Jew of no religion, but I would have been caught as, in their survey, as a Jew by religion, because I probably would have checked Jewish. So it's not, and there are many Jews of no religion who answered they believe in something, right? They're not all atheists. But I think the percentage was about 30% of their entire number of Jews in America are this Jews of no religion. But that speaks to this idea that Judaism is not just a religion. The Pew survey understood that if you only consider it Jews by religion, you're going to lose this whole segment. But the organized Jewish community looks at that segment and says, they don't support Israel, they don't go to synagogues, they don't write a check to Jewish Federation. They're not good Jews, right? They're bad Jews. So that's the challenge, but that's also the beauty of having the Pew Foundation do the survey and not the organized Jewish community.
Can you check 2 boxes?
On the religion one, I think you could only check one.
Oh.
I think. It's a good question.
A great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. What are the implications of Jews being increasingly secular and atheist or humanist or whatever it is for organizations that are secular? Are Jews more active in these organizations because of their beliefs? Do these organizations reach out to Jews?
So I will say, just by looking, not that I would poach anyone, but just by looking at donor lists of groups like Freedom from Religion Foundation, I swear I'm not stealing anybody, but just by looking at names, because they list them, and it's no longer fully accurate to look at a name like Goldberg and presume that they're Jewish, but just looking at common Jewish last names, Cohen, there's definitely more than 2.5% representation in groups like American Humanist Association and Center for Inquiry and Freedom from Religion Foundation. But again, that's because Jews are activists in political causes. And so, yeah, I would say there are a lot of Jews. I don't think there is outreach specifically to Jews from those organizations, particularly because their mission is secularity. And in some ways, and also many of them see Judaism as a religion and aren't doing the nuanced thing that I just did. But that's where I see Society for Humanistic Judaism as kind of a bridge between the organized Jewish community, which we are engaged with, and the secular organizing community, which we're also engaged with. So Society for Humanistic Judaism is a member of the Secular Coalition for America, which is an umbrella for groups like us and Freedom from Religion Foundation and so on. And we're also a member of the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable, which if you go to their website, you'll see great organizations like Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, Bend the Arc, and other Jewish social justice groups, all of whom I love. And there's representation from the other Jewish denominations outside of Orthodoxy. Yeah?
I was born and raised in Claremont back in the late 30s, early 40s. I used to get beat up when I was going to school because I was a member of the only Jewish family in Central Florida, in that area. And I've gone through life, going to being bar mitzvah, et cetera, and I've done a lot of studying on advanced mathematics, solar, the astronomical physics, etc. I believe in the Big Bang and things like that. So I have to ask you one simple question. What is your purpose in being here today? I'm confused.
I'm sharing the option for Jews who may be Jewish by heritage, but not at all participating in any Jewish community at all, or any Jewish ritual at all, because they've moved away from it, because they're not religious, and they grew up thinking you need to be a believer to be part of a Jewish community or to engage in Jewish life, and let them know that there is an option called Humanistic Judaism, or simply being a secular Jew, that allows you to decide for yourself which pieces you want to take with you and which you want to leave behind, and that you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater being religious belief, because there is so much more there that could be of interest and value and so on. And for me, it is history. I'm a history buff. I love reading about Jewish history, but that's not going to connect everyone in my family, because they're not all interested in. I know more Japanese history than my wife does. She pronounces the names correctly, but that's my interest. But she loves the food. And when we have Passover at my folks' house and she's eating the chopped liver and the gefilte fish, and she turned to me and said, "I love this stuff. I'm as Jewish as you are." And I'm like, okay, and she's a culinary Jew. And that's fine. That is an identity that's valid. And I'm against the folks who would then call anyone a bad Jew because they're only into it. They're only in it for the food, right? So yeah.
Now, I do stream the holidays.
You stream it from
congregation in Loveland or Lovelace, Ohio.
Okay. Oh yeah, Beth Adam.
Beth Adam.
Yep.
Yes. I stream them religiously for
right.
years.
So they are the founder of a community in Cincinnati, Ohio, was a protege of the founder of Humanistic Judaism. They had a falling out because they're Jews, whatever. And so he's been running a humanistic Jewish congregation for decades. He just retired. They found a replacement. But and so he's been online. He was streaming well before COVID. Like, he was way ahead of the curve on streaming humanistic high holidays. He had tens of thousands of people following along on the high holidays, and he did a lovely job explaining, here's the words that we use, here's why we use them, and then he goes into it. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you all very much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Freedom from religion.